And you see now we're recording.
I don't see it.
See that? It says record right there.
Okay. I'm a little red-green colorblind, so it doesn't.
Oh, well,
pop
it's
up.
red.
Okay.
It probably looks brown to you.
It doesn't. I don't see it, but I do see it when you point it out. I can't see it like right from here, for example. It's against the gray, so.
Mm-hmm. Well,
good.
do we want to? You want to?
No, we don't.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch nothing. Thank you. That's really great, Sid. I appreciate all your time and help.
There you go.
I'm
And we have plenty of battery.
Oh, we
And
do. Good. That was something I hadn't even thought about.
hey, Bill.
Hey, what?
No, just. And it's already. It autofocuses.
I like if you could hold that up. in
Yeah,
front
yeah,
of you.
sure.
Sid, if you could ask somebody to run out and get some bourbon. What's your favorite?
No, I drank a fifth of bourbon in college and haven't drank it since.
Okay, yeah.
A similar thing with vodka happened to me.
Yeah.
So I
Southern
couldn't
Comfort.
touch it for years. All right.
How we looking?
Good.
So handsome. Okay, thank
Roll
you very
tape.
much. Okay.
So where do what do you got? My head, my neck? What do you got?
You want to see? I'll show you.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
You can just
we
tell
got
me.
it like right about to your elbows.
Okay.
You know,
Good enough.
very kind of Napoleonic.
Right.
Bye. Thank you, Sid.
Is it running?
Yes, it's running.
Okay, good enough.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk to you, but we're going to edit out my parts of the conversation. So you can, if you can, as much as possible, speak in complete sentences as though I haven't asked you the question, that you've just sort of thought of it. And I might make like little gestures to remind you of that, like, you know.
Like what?
Like,
Like
no, not like that. But like.
I might make some gestures at you.
Yeah, you're welcome to, but we'll have to bleep them. But that's okay. So it will be more like that, kind of more. If I want you to speak more on a topic to keep my voice off the recording, I'll ask you to.
Okay.
You know, I'll just make little. Come on, more. Okay. So you know, I've only been here for 3 years. I know nothing about you. So I hope you don't take any of these questions personally. We just want to get it on the record. I don't even know when you started here, for example.
I started here in June 1980 as the propagator. I was the first propagator hired here. And my job was I was coming out of graduate school from the Longwood program at the University of Delaware, and my job here was to grow plants for the garden, grow plants for sale, and to work on propagation of rare and endangered plants. So that's how it all got started.
How did you become conservation director? How did you go from, what's interesting to me is that I did not know that I know you came from Longwood.
Right.
I didn't know that you were a propagator here. So now
Before-
you're in conservation, so can you tell
Well,
that
what
story?
happened was, before I was at Longwood,
Can you start that over again, please?
Yes. Before I was at Longwood, after college, I ended up in Holland with a buddy of mine, on a lark, really, ended up working in perennials, herbaceous perennials and bulbs in Holland, and liked it, worked there for 2 years. Didn't know a plant from Adam before I started, and kind of got hooked on the plants, and I like the physical work. I like the ideas about trying to figure out what plants were, and we were planting whole fields of these plants, perennials, on our knees in Holland. After that, my buddy and I were going to start a perennial nursery together when we came back to the United States. So we said, well, we got to get some experience. He went to Ohio and worked for a field-grown operation, and I went to Maryland and worked for a container-grown perennial. These are wholesale perennial growers. So after that, I did that for about 6 years and decided during that time I was taking courses in botany and taxonomy and things like that, and all of a sudden I realized that some of the things that I had thought about plants actually pertained to the world around me, and so I started getting interested in that. And I got into the Longwood program and wrote my thesis on endangered species programs for North American Botanic Gardens because I was interested in endangered species. So that's how it happened that I ended up, after Longwood program ended, this job opened up here as a propagator, and that's how I ended up here.
I'm going to stop you for one moment.
Okay.
I hear my phone, and I'm going to turn that off.
I better turn mine off too.
Yeah, jeez. This is exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for, so perfect. Okay, so I want to back up and just ask you, why did you get interested in endangered species programs?
Before I went to Longwood, I was in Colorado and hiking around and looking at alpine flora. And I ended up wondering I saw Colorado columbine, and I didn't know much about it and was trying to figure out it. I knew it was endangered. I'd seen pictures of it before, but I found it up in Colorado on a peak. And just started wondering about endangered species and started looking into it a little bit more in terms of how they get listed, how to protect them, that sort of thing.
And so you started here as a propagator, and then how did the conservation department, did you start the conservation program here, the department?
Yeah, I started the conservation, well, the society's always been interested in conservation from the start. The people who started the society were worried about the plants being taken out of the wild for sale. So that was a concern when we came here too, and we realized that it is, the collecting from the wild is always can be a concern, especially with rare species. It is a concern, but what was more important was actually the habitats were being destroyed rather than the actual plants being for sale. It was much more of a threat to the plants. So when we started to work on the propagation of some of these plants, we started getting some notoriety for helping people with growing of rare plant species for introduction projects, that sort of thing. And after about 10 years here really in the fall of 1991, I was asking, in early 1991, I was asking, well, okay, everybody who's in the nursery business, and which is what I was doing, sort of has to make a decision at some point. You have to say whether I'm going to continue to work for somebody else or is this something I can do on my own. So I had to make that decision for myself. And I decided to, I went to my director, David Longman, who was the director at the time, and said, okay, what are we going to do here? I got to figure something else to do. I've done this for 10 years. I want to do something different. And he said, well, let's think about a conservation program. So we came up with that. And it got funded, and that was the start of the NEPCOP program in, say, January 1991, actually, December 1990, January 1991. And that's how it started.
Tell us about what NEPCOP is.
Well, the idea was that we were trying to develop a collaborative because we were a small institution. You need to partner with people. And in fact, in the conservation field, nobody can do everything all by themselves anyway. So you need to partner in conservation. If we don't partner, then nobody gets anything done. So you really need to partner with other conservation organizations to get anything done. And what our focus at the time when we started this in January 1991, the focus was really about collecting seed and propagating plants, because that's what we thought the society had a large role in horticulture. That's some of what we've been doing. And after the first meeting, so the first year we went in there thinking, okay, we're gonna get all these people together in each of the states and have task force meetings in each of the states and talk about seed collection for rare and endangered species. And it became immediately obvious that what we really needed was more knowledge of what was actually going on in the wild rather than seed collection. So the first year I went out and made 50 or 60 seed collections on my own. But the next year we started talking about other people in each of the task forces becoming involved in updating the status of each of these rare plant populations. So that became pretty obvious after that we needed, we were doing some seed collection in there too, but really we were trying to get people to figure out really what the status of the plants of the wild had been, because in many cases we didn't, the records were 10, 20, 30 years old. We didn't know if these populations actually existed anymore. So these volunteers, these people did this as part of what they do for their organization or what they wanted to do on their own. And we started finding out more information about this. And in about 2 years after that, we started, somebody came up with the idea, and it wasn't me who came up with the idea that we could try to get volunteers who were lay people to do this. And so we started, I think it was 92 or 93, we started with a pilot project in Massachusetts with training lay people, volunteers who weren't, I don't like the term lay people because some of these people are as good as any of the professionals. But anyway, people who weren't in the field professionally to monitor rare plant populations. And we started doing that, and other states started seeing that this was, the program, the data they were getting was good data, it was repeatable, and that the secrecy of the population locations wasn't being divulged, which was a real concern to all the professionals. So that basically was the start of how the PCV started. And all the states started seeing that, well, look, Massachusetts is getting 100 field forms from these PCVs. Maybe we should think about doing this in other states. So we started then expanding into other states, and it wasn't long before we were in all 6 states after that. So that's how that happened. The NEPCOP whole thing was started in the 90s by grants. We got original grants to start this, and then we subsumed that came part of the New England Wildflower Society budget. That's how it happened. So that's how the whole thing happened.
Thank you. I'm going to just remind you to talk a little bit more slowly than you usually do.
Okay.
It's hard to do that, but if I let's see for a signal for that.
Okay.
How about that? Okay, thank you. So that was, NEPCOP was 92, 93?
NEPCOP was it started in January of 1991, really.
Oh, cool. Okay, wow. So you're launching the conservation mission, and I interrupted your story to actually step back and describe NEPCOP because you had alluded to it, but
Right.
tell me more about.
NEPCOP stands for New England Plant Conservation Program. It is a voluntary collaborative of over 50 or 60 organizations, representatives from these organizations, and the purpose of it is to prevent the extirpation and promote the recovery of the region's rare endangered species. That's the whole purpose of NEPCOP, and it runs by task forces in each state, which sort of designate what are the actions for that particular year in that particular state, and each state's going to have its own different priorities. And then there's a regional advisory council that meets and oversees what NEPCOP does. We came out with a booklet with NEPCOP policies early on too. I think it was 95, somewhere in there, which talked about how we were going to approach the taxonomy, what sources we were going to use, how we were going to approach monitoring the wild and seed collection, that sort of thing. And when you look back on it, it's pretty interesting to see what we thought then and the changes now. But it was a really good guide. It was a sort of a snapshot in time of the thought of the plant conservation community in New England. And you have to realize that this sort of collaborative really had not been started in other regions of the country to this extent. I mean, obviously people were getting together and discussing things, and people were looking at sites for protection through the Nature Conservancy and other groups and that sort of thing. So they were having these things, but this really sort of took a different tact in some ways. And the reason it works in New England, I think, is that there's a really strong conservation ethic here in New England. If you're in other parts of the country, it might not be as workable. Also, we're a reasonable size. We're not huge. We're about, if you take all of New England, it's about the same size as the state of Washington. So it's a reasonable size to work in. I think we have not that much, if you think about it, we don't have very much public land. I mean, by that I mean federal land. We have an awful lot of private land and state land. And private landowners have been extremely helpful in terms of, and interested in getting these things, and allowing people to come on their properties and collect seed and monitor plants over time. So I think there's a real conservation ethic here. And also New England at one time, I think, had over half the land trusts in the country early on. So, that's sort of, you have that sort of conservation ethic here, which you don't have necessarily in other parts of the country. And in some ways, that should be a detriment, but because if you have federal government land, if the government owns all the land in your state, then theoretically you should be able to go on that land if you have permission from the federal government. But here we had to get permission from every single landowner, and we were able to do that from a lot of them. I'd say 80%, 70 to 80% each year. So that's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah, that's great. The light is changing a little, so I'm gonna do a little more dancing with the camera. Hold on a moment, please.